Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house in suburban Ohio. Dad raises his glass eyes, gleaming with pride as he toasts Susan, my older sister. To Susan's promotion to partner at the firm, Ruth, when will you catch up to your sister? The familiar sting of comparison cuts deep. I grip my water glass, feeling everyone's pitying glances. Susan smirks from across the table. I take a breath, set down my glass, and say three words that change everything. I already did. The silence that followed my words was deafening, but let me take you back to understand how we got here. Growing up as the younger daughter in the Morrison household meant living in a very particular kind of shadow. Susan was 3 years older than me, and from the moment she could walk, she was destined for greatness in my father's eyes. I remember being 7 years old, sitting at this very same dining table, watching Dad beam as Susan showed him her straight A report card. "That's my girl," he'd say, ruffling her perfectly styled blonde hair. "You're going to be a lawyer just like your old man." When I proudly presented my own report card decorated with smiley face stickers from Mrs. Henderson, his response was always measured. "Good job, Ruth. Maybe if you work harder, you can be like your sister." Susan thrived under the pressure. She was valedictorian at Westfield High, captain of the debate team, and president of the student council. Her acceptance letter to Harvard Law arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in March, and I swear Dad threw a bigger party than most people have for weddings. The whole neighborhood was invited to celebrate his daughter's achievement. I was 15 then, quietly helping Mom serve appetizers while everyone toasted Susan's future. I chose a different path. While Susan was mastering constitutional law at Harvard, I was drawn to the pediatric ward at Riverside General during my volunteer hours. Something about the way those sick children still managed to smile, the way their eyes lit up when I'd read them stories or helped them with their homework, it spoke to something deep inside me. When I announced I was going to nursing school at Ohio State, the disappointment in Dad's voice was palpable. "Nursing," he'd said, setting down his coffee mug with deliberate slowness. "Ruth, you're smart enough for so much more. Why would you want to empty bedpans when you could be arguing cases?" I tried explaining that pediatric nursing was about so much more than what he imagined. It was about being the bridge between frightened families and complex medical systems. It was about advocating for tiny patients who couldn't advocate for themselves. But Dad had already made up his mind. In his world, there were prestigious careers, and then there was everything else. Family gatherings became predictable performances. Susan would arrive in her latest designer suit, armed with stories about high-profile cases and senior partners who were grooming her for greatness. Dad would hang on every word, occasionally turning to me with that look that said he was still waiting for me to come to my senses. "Ruth's doing her little nursing thing," he'd tell relatives, the dismissiveness wrapped in false cheer. "It's noble work, of course. Not everyone can be a legal eagle like Susan." But here's what nobody knew. During those humiliating dinners, I was exhausted. Not from the 12-hour shifts at the children's hospital or the emotional weight of caring for sick kids. I was tired of trying to earn validation from someone who had already decided my worth based on my career choice. So 3 years ago, I made a decision that would change everything. I enrolled in an online MBA program at Northwestern scheduling classes around my nursing shifts. I didn't tell anyone. Not Mom, who would have worried about me overworking. Not Susan, who would have found a way to make it about her. And definitely not Dad, who would have seen it as me finally admitting he was right all along. This wasn't about proving anything to them anymore. This was about proving something to myself. The late nights were brutal. I'd finish a shift at 7 in the evening, grab a protein shake from the hospital cafeteria, and log into my corporate finance class by 8. My colleagues thought I was going home to rest. My family thought I was probably binge-watching medical dramas like some stereotype they'd constructed of my simple life. The truth was, I was discovering I had a talent for understanding complex systems and seeing inefficiencies others missed. My professors were impressed by my unique perspective. While my classmates approached case studies from theoretical standpoints, I brought real-world experience from the hospital floor. I understood supply chain management because I'd seen what happened when critical medications didn't arrive on time. I grasped human resources challenges because I'd worked with understaffed units trying to maintain quality care. But the real revelation came during my healthcare innovation course. As I sat in my cramped apartment laptop balanced on my second-hand coffee table, I realized something profound. The business world wasn't separate from the caring profession I'd chosen. It was a tool I could use to amplify the impact I wanted to make. Every spreadsheet, every market analysis, every strategic framework was just another way to help more children get better care. I submitted my final MBA thesis 6 months ago, graduating with distinction. The diploma arrived in a plain brown envelope on a rainy Thursday. I hung it on my bedroom wall right next to my nursing degree, where no one would see it but me. It wasn't about the recognition anymore. It was about the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd pushed myself beyond what anyone expected, especially myself. 3 years before that MBA graduation, my life had taken a devastating turn that ultimately set me on this secret path. Mark and I had been married for 5 years when everything fell apart. He was a pharmaceutical sales rep I'd met at the hospital, charming in that practiced way that should have been my first warning sign. But I was 27 and believed in love the way you do before life teaches you otherwise. The marriage started unraveling slowly, then all at once. Mark had always made subtle comments about my career choice. "Don't you want more?" he'd ask, scrolling through his phone while I told him about a breakthrough with a young patient. "I mean, your sister's making 6 figures at her firm. We could be living so much better if you had that kind of ambition." I tried explaining that my ambition looked different. It looked like the 8-year-old leukemia patient who finally kept down solid food after weeks of trying. It looked like the premature twins whose parents trusted me to guide them through the NICU journey. But Mark's eyes would glaze over, already calculating what we couldn't afford on my nurse's salary. The comparisons to Susan became constant. He'd come home from dinner with his colleagues talking about their wives who were executives and entrepreneurs. Brad's wife just got promoted to VP at her company. He'd announce loosening his tie with apparent frustration. Meanwhile, I'm explaining why my wife is still making $40,000 a year wiping noses. The night he left was a Tuesday in October. I'd just finished a particularly difficult shift where we'd lost a patient, a sweet 6-year-old named Emma, who'd fought brain cancer for 2 years. I came home emotionally drained to find Mark packing his things into boxes he had apparently hidden in our closet for weeks. "I've met someone," he said, not even looking up from folding his shirts with mechanical precision. "Cheryl from the Denver office. She understands what it takes to build something significant. She's driven, Ruth. She gets that life is about more than just getting by." I stood in our bedroom doorway, still in my scrubs that carried the faint smell of hospital disinfectant, watching my marriage dissolve into cardboard boxes. "Is this about money?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mark finally looked at me then, and the disdain in his eyes hit harder than any physical blow. "It's about everything, Ruth. You're content being mediocre, your sister's out there conquering the legal world, and you're satisfied playing nurse. I need someone who matches my ambition, not someone who holds me back." The divorce papers were served a week later. Susan naturally recommended her firm's best divorce attorney. Dad's response when I told him was somehow worse than Mark's leaving. He sat in his leather study chair, fingers steepled like he was analyzing a case, and asked, "What did you do to drive him away, Ruth?" "What did I do?" I repeated, feeling something inside me crack. "Well, you must have done something," he continued, oblivious to my growing anger. "Mark was a successful man with options. Maybe if you'd shown more drive, been more like—" He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. We both knew how that sentence ended. Susan's contribution came during a family dinner, 2 weeks after Mark left. She'd arrived late as always, full of apologies about depositions and client meetings. As Mom served her famous pot roast, Susan launched into her advice. "The thing is, Ruth," she said, cutting her meat with surgical precision, "men like Mark need intellectual stimulation. You have to keep them interested. Maybe take up golf or learn about the stock market. Brad and I discuss merger acquisitions over breakfast, and it keeps things dynamic." I pushed green beans around my plate, biting back the urge to mention that I'd noticed Brad checking our 19-year-old cousin's Instagram during Grandma's birthday party. Instead, I nodded and made appropriate sounds while Susan outlined a 5-point plan for winning back a man who'd already moved to Denver with his new girlfriend. But something shifted that night. As I drove home to my empty apartment, Susan's words echoing alongside Dad's disappointment, I felt a strange sense of clarity. They all thought Mark left because I wasn't enough. The truth, which I discovered months later through a mutual friend named Janet, was far more revealing. Janet worked at the same pharmaceutical company and reached out after running into me at the grocery store. Over coffee at a quiet cafe, she leaned in with the conspiratorial air of someone sharing classified information. "Mark was in trouble, Ruth," she whispered, glancing around as if corporate spies might be listening. "His sales numbers were tanking. He'd been falsifying call reports, claiming meetings with doctors that never happened. The company was about to launch an investigation." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. What does that have to do with him leaving me? Janet's expression softened with sympathy. "He came to the Denver office for a fresh start. But really, it was to avoid the audit. And Cheryl, she's the regional manager's daughter. Mark figured if he couldn't save his career with performance, he'd save it with connections." But there was more. Janet revealed that Mark had been drowning in debt from a failed side business, some app development scheme he'd invested in without telling me. He'd maxed out 3 credit cards I didn't know existed and had been desperately trying to get approved for loans. "He asked around the office if anyone knew investors," Janet continued. "Said he had a nurse wife who was too conservative with money, wouldn't support his entrepreneurial spirit. Ruth, I think he was planning to ask you for your savings. When you didn't offer it up freely, he found someone else who might bankroll his lifestyle." I sat in that cafe watching steam rise from my untouched coffee and felt something fundamental shift inside me. All this time, I'd been questioning myself, wondering if I truly wasn't enough. The reality was that Mark had left because I was too much. Too ethical to falsify records, too careful to gamble our security on his schemes, too grounded to pretend success while drowning in deception. That revelation should have been liberating, but it came with its own kind of pain. My family had immediately assumed I was the problem. They'd been so ready to believe I'd failed at marriage, just like they believed I'd failed at choosing a prestigious career. Not one person had asked about Mark's character or considered that maybe the problem wasn't my lack of ambition, but his lack of integrity. I returned to my empty apartment that night with a new understanding. The people who were supposed to support me unconditionally had conditions after all. Their love and respect came with prerequisites: the right career, the right spouse, the right level of visible success. I'd spent 29 years trying to earn approval that would always be just out of reach because I'd chosen a different path. But there in my small living room with its secondhand furniture and photos of my young patient's artwork taped to the fridge, I made a decision. If they were going to underestimate me anyway, I might as well use that invisibility to my advantage. Let them think I was just a nurse, struggling to rebuild after divorce. Meanwhile, I'd build something they'd never see coming. The next morning, I opened my laptop and started researching MBA programs, not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. There was nothing mediocre about choosing to serve others, but maybe I could find a way to serve them on a scale that even my father would have to respect. The breaking point, it turned out, was also the turning point. The 18 months following my divorce were transformative in ways no one in my family could have imagined. I moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment in Riverside Heights, a working-class neighborhood where the rent was cheap and the neighbors minded their own business. While Susan lived in her glass-walled high-rise downtown, I found peace in my simple space with its creaky floors and windows that faced a small community garden. My routine became sacred. Hospital shifts from 7 in the morning to 7 at night, 3 days a week. The other 4 days were split between my MBA coursework and something that started as mere observation but grew into obsession. During my years in pediatric care, I'd noticed countless inefficiencies that seemed so obvious from the ground level but invisible to hospital administration. Medication timing errors that could have been prevented, communication gaps between shifts that led to repeated tests, parents frantically trying to coordinate between multiple specialists with no central system to help them. It started with a notebook. I'd jot down observations during my breaks, sitting in the hospital courtyard where other nurses came to decompress. They'd smoke cigarettes or scroll through social media while I filled page after page with workflow diagrams and system failures. My colleague Marie once asked what I was always writing. "Just some ideas," I told her, closing the notebook casually. Marie shrugged and went back to complaining about her ex-husband, never knowing she'd just witnessed the birth of something that would revolutionize pediatric care. The real catalyst came through 8-year-old Zachary Chen, a patient with complex medical needs who'd been in and out of our unit for 2 years. His mother, Linda, was a force of nature carrying 3 binders full of medical records, test results, and medication schedules. I watched her struggle to update each specialist about Zachary's condition, repeating the same information dozens of times, sometimes forgetting crucial details in her exhaustion. One particularly chaotic afternoon, a medication error nearly occurred because Linda's handwritten notes about a recent dosage change hadn't been communicated to the new resident. I caught it just in time, but the near miss haunted me. That night, instead of studying for my operations management exam, I started sketching out a solution. What if there was a centralized app where all of Zachary's providers could access real-time updates? What if Linda could input information once and have it populate across every relevant system? What if we could use predictive analytics to flag potential issues before they became emergencies? I knew nothing about app development, but YouTube University became my second classroom. After my MBA lectures ended at 10, I'd switch tabs to coding tutorials. HTML, CSS, JavaScript, languages that might as well have been Mandarin 6 months earlier, slowly started making sense. My kitchen table became a command center covered in sticky notes with code snippets and user interface sketches. The first prototype was embarrassingly basic. I built it using free tools and templates, testing it on my ancient laptop that wheezed when running multiple programs, but it worked. I could input patient data, set medication reminders, create communication logs between providers, and generate simple reports. It was ugly, held together by digital duct tape, but it was mine. I named it Care Connect, though I'd later realize how many products already had similar names. But at that moment, at 2 in the morning with my eyes burning from screen glare, it felt like I'd created something magical. The next challenge was testing it in the real world. I couldn't use actual patient data without proper approvals, so I became my own guinea pig. I tracked my own health metrics, logged my vitamin schedule, and pretended to coordinate between imaginary specialists. The system held up, but I knew I needed real feedback from actual users. That's when fate intervened in the form of Gregory Hartman. He wasn't a patient, but the father of one. His daughter Lily had been battling a rare autoimmune condition for 3 years. Gregory himself was something of a legend in Silicon Valley, though I didn't know it when he first appeared on our unit. He just looked like another exhausted parent designer genes, wrinkled from sleeping in hospital chairs, expensive watch, incongruous against the pediatric ward's cartoon murals. I was updating Lily's chart on my phone during a quiet moment using my prototype app to track her medication schedule more efficiently than the hospital's outdated system. Gregory noticed immediately. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying that particular mix of curiosity and command that I'd later recognize as entrepreneurial instinct. "What application are you using there?" My first impulse was to deflect, but something in his genuine interest made me pause. "It's something I've been working on," I admitted, "just a tool to help track patient care more effectively." His eyes sharpened with the focus of someone who'd spent decades identifying opportunity. "May I see?" For the next 20 minutes, I gave Gregory Hartman, founder of 3 successful tech companies, an angel investor in dozens more, a demo of my amateur app on my cracked phone screen. He asked pointed questions about scalability, HIPAA compliance, and market potential, terms I was just learning in my MBA program, but that he wielded like a surgeon with a scalpel. "This is rough," he said finally, and my heart sank. "But the concept is brilliant. You're solving a real problem you've personally experienced. That's where the best companies start." He pulled out a business card premium stock that felt substantial between my fingers. "I want to help you develop this properly, not as an investor yet. You're not ready for that. But as a mentor, someone who can guide you through the tech landscape." I stared at the card, then at him. "Why would you do that?" Gregory glanced through the window at Lily sleeping peacefully after a difficult procedure. "Because you're trying to make life easier for families like mine, and because I recognize potential when I see it. You have the domain expertise and the drive. You just need the technical infrastructure and business acumen to match." That conversation changed everything. Gregory became my secret weapon, meeting with me weekly via video calls that I took from my car in the hospital parking garage. He introduced me to resources I never knew existed: free development platforms, open-source libraries, startup incubators that operated virtually. Under his guidance, I rebuilt CareConnect from scratch, this time with proper architecture that could actually scale. But I told no one in my family. When Mom called to check on me, I was fine, just working a lot. When Susan texted about meeting for brunch, I was too tired from extra shifts. When Dad made his monthly call to express disappointment in my life choices, I bit my tongue and let him lecture. The secrecy wasn't about spite or drama. It was about protection. I was building something fragile and new, like the premature babies I cared for in the NICU. It needed time to grow strong before being exposed to the harsh judgment of people who'd already decided what I was capable of. Every dismissive comment from Dad, every condescending advice session from Susan, every pitying look from extended family members just reinforced my decision to keep my journey private. Meanwhile, my 2 lives began to merge in unexpected ways. The MBA program taught me about market analysis and competitive advantage concepts I immediately applied to CareConnect. My nursing experience gave me insights my business school classmates couldn't fathom. I understood the healthcare system's pain points, not from case studies, but from living them every single day. Gregory pushed me to think bigger. "You're not just building an app," he said during one of our sessions. "You're creating a platform that could transform pediatric care delivery. Stop thinking like a nurse who codes. Start thinking like a CEO who happens to have deep healthcare expertise." The mental shift was jarring but necessary. I started attending virtual startup meetups, always with my camera, off, absorbing wisdom from founders who'd walked this path before. I learned about venture capital and term sheets, about burn rates and runway. My vocabulary expanded beyond medical terminology to include SaaS metrics and user acquisition costs. But the most valuable lesson came from Gregory's own story. Over coffee during one of Lily's outpatient visits, he told me about his first company's failure, how he'd lost everything and had to move back in with his parents at 35. "Everyone thought I was finished," he said, stirring sugar into his hospital cafeteria coffee. My brother was a successful lawyer, kept offering me jobs at his firm, but I knew I had to build something meaningful, even if no one else understood why. The parallel wasn't lost on me. Did your family ever come around? Gregory smiled, but it carried weight. Success has a way of rewriting history. The same people who called me foolish now claim they always believed in me. But here's the truth. External validation is worthless if you don't first validate yourself. 6 months into development, Care Connect was ready for its first real test. The prototype had evolved from a basic tracking tool into a sophisticated platform with secure messaging, automated appointment scheduling, medication management, with interaction warnings, and even a feature that translated medical jargon into plain English for overwhelmed parents. The pilot program started small. I recruited 5 families from my unit, all dealing with chronic conditions requiring coordination between multiple specialists. The hospital's innovation committee, impressed by a presentation I'd nervously delivered to the board, granted provisional approval for a limited trial. They didn't know I was the sole developer, assuming Care Connect Technologies was an established company rather than just me working from my apartment at midnight. The first family to fully embrace the system was the Johnsons. Their son Michael had cerebral palsy and saw 8 different specialists across 3 hospital systems. Michael's mother, Patricia, nearly cried when I showed her how she could update all his providers simultaneously about a new mobility issue he'd developed. "Do you know how many phone calls this saves me?" she asked, clutching her phone like a lifeline. "How many times I won't have to repeat his entire medical history?" The feedback was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Nurses on my unit started asking when they could use the new system for their patients. Doctors who initially resisted another technology platform changed their tune when they saw how much time it saved during rounds. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. Teresa Martin, CEO of MedTech Innovations, somehow heard about our pilot program. She appeared on the unit one Tuesday morning power suit, incongruous among the cartoon murals and beeping monitors. I was in the middle of placing an IV when my supervisor frantically paged me. "There's someone important here to see you," she whispered, eyes wide with confusion. "Something about your app." I found Teresa in the family conference room, her team of 2 assistants flanking her like corporate bodyguards. She stood when I entered, still in my wrinkled scrubs with a Winnie the Pooh sticker on my ID badge from making a young patient laugh. "Oh, Ruth Morrison," she asked, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Teresa Martins. I understand you're the mind behind Care Connect." The conversation that followed felt surreal. Teresa had reviewed our pilot data and saw potential for integration into her company's larger healthcare ecosystem. She spoke about market penetration and strategic partnerships, while I tried to process that this was actually happening. "We'd like to offer you a contract," she said, sliding a folder across the table. $500,000 for licensing rights to implement Care Connect across our Northern Ohio hospital network. You'd maintain ownership and continue development, but we'd handle deployment and support. $500,000. The number felt impossible, like something from a different universe than my 1-bedroom apartment and secondhand furniture. I managed to maintain professional composure, telling Teresa I'd need to review the terms with my legal team. She didn't need to know my legal team was a startup lawyer Gregory had recommended, who worked for equity instead of cash. The contract negotiations took 3 weeks. I'd study terms and conditions between patient rounds, learning about intellectual property rights and milestone payments. Susan would have been horrified by my amateur approach to legal documents, but I was determined to understand every clause myself. During this time, maintaining my secret became increasingly difficult. Mom noticed I seemed distracted lately during our weekly calls. Dad left a voicemail expressing concern that I was working too many shifts and burning out. Susan sent texts about a new restaurant opening, completely unaware that I was negotiating a deal worth more than her annual salary. The day I signed the contract, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, hands shaking as I held the executed documents. $500,000. Not from inheritance or marriage or any of the traditional paths my family recognized. From an idea I developed while they pitied my simple nurse life. But I didn't celebrate publicly. Instead, I went back to my shift-administered medications, comforted frightened children, and updated charts like any other day. The only difference was the signed contract in my locker and the quiet knowledge that everything had changed. The money hit my account 2 weeks later. I stared at the balance on my banking app, refreshing it multiple times to ensure it was real. My first instinct was to pay off my student loans, but Gregory advised patience. "This is seed capital," he explained during our mentoring session. "You need to think strategically. Keep your lifestyle the same for now. Reinvest in the business." So I did exactly that. I hired 2 freelance developers to help expand CareConnect's features. I paid for proper security audits and HIPAA compliance certification. I trademarked the name and filed provisional patents for our unique processes. All of this happened quietly, through the LLC I'd formed with a P.O. box address. Meanwhile, family dinners continued their predictable patterns. At my cousin Rachel's engagement party, Dad cornered me near the dessert table to deliver another lecture about ambition. "Your sister just landed the Henderson Industries account," he said, selecting a pitied 4 with the same precision he used to dissect my life choices. "Biggest contract her firm has seen in 5 years. What about you, Ruth? Any prospects?" I thought about the contract in my apartment, about the hospitals already requesting demos, about the 3 families who'd sent heartfelt thank you notes saying CareConnect had transformed their ability to manage their children's care. "Just taking things one day at a time, Dad," I replied, reaching for a chocolate-covered strawberry. He sighed with theatrical disappointment. "One day, Ruth, you'll realize that life rewards those who reach for more than just one day at a time." Susan understood that. Maybe it's not too late for you to learn. Susan herself swept over champagne glass in hand, designer dress catching the light. "What are we discussing, Ruth's dating life?" "You know there's a paralegal at my firm who just got divorced. I could set you up." I'm good, thanks," I said, smiling genuinely for the first time that evening. They had no idea how good things actually were. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here they were trying to fix my supposedly broken life while I was quietly revolutionizing pediatric healthcare. Every condescending suggestion, every pitying look, every comparison to Susan's visible success just reinforced my decision to keep building in private. That night, I received an email that made the $500,000 contract seem like just the beginning. 3 major hospital systems wanted demos. A prominent healthcare venture capital firm had heard about CareConnect and wanted to discuss Series A funding. The App Store metrics showed thousands of organic downloads from word of mouth alone. But perhaps the most meaningful message came from Linda Chen Zachary's mother, who'd inspired the whole journey. She'd been using CareConnect for 2 months and wanted me to know that for the first time in years, she felt in control of her son's care. "You gave me back hours of my life every week," she wrote, "but more importantly, you gave me peace of mind." I printed that email and tucked it into my notebook next to the first sketches of CareConnect. Success, I was learning, had many definitions. My family measured it in salary figures and office views, but sitting in my modest apartment, knowing that dozens of families were sleeping better because of something I'd built, I understood that the most meaningful victories are often the ones no one else can see. The first victory wasn't the contract or the money or the growing user base. It was the quiet realization that I didn't need anyone else's validation to know I was building something extraordinary. The real triumph was in the building itself, in proving to myself that a pediatric nurse from Ohio could create technology that mattered. And this was just the beginning. The months following my first major contract brought a peculiar form of isolation. Success, I discovered, is surprisingly easy to hide when everyone around you has already decided who you are. My family's preconceived notions about poor Ruth created a blind spot so large I could have parked a yacht in it and they wouldn't have noticed. The calls from my mother increased in frequency and concern. She'd phone every few days, her voice carrying that particular blend of worry and disappointment that only mothers can perfect. "Oh, honey, I was at the grocery store today and ran into Mrs. Patterson," she said during one memorable Tuesday evening call. "Her daughter just got engaged to a cardiologist. Such a lovely man. You know, Ruth, you're 32 now. Have you thought about perhaps lowering your standards a little?" I was reviewing term sheets from potential investors while she spoke my laptop screen, showing valuations that would have sent her into cardiac arrest. "My standards are fine, Mom." "Well, clearly they're too high if you're still alone. After Mark left, I thought you'd be more flexible. Susan says there's a divorced lawyer at her firm who'd be perfect for you. He's 43, has 2 kids, but he's financially stable. That's what you need right now. Stability." The irony of her words wasn't lost on me as I looked at my bank balance, now healthy, beyond anything my family could imagine. But I couldn't explain that my definition of stability didn't require a man to provide it. "Jonathan Kramer." Mom continued, undeterred by my silence. "Susan says he makes good money, drives a BMW. He could take care of you, Ruth. Isn't it time you let someone take care of you?" I minimized the investment proposal I was reviewing. A tech giant wanted to discuss potential acquisition for a number that started with 8 figures. "I'm taking care of myself just fine, Mom." Her sigh carried the weight of generations of mothers disappointed by independent daughters. "But for how long, dear? You can't be a nurse forever. Your knees will give out, your back will ache. What's your plan then?" My plan included scaling Care Connect to every major children's hospital in the country, but I simply said, "I'll figure it out." The conversation shifted to Susan's latest accomplishments: a profile in Legal Weekly, a speech at the State Bar Association, rumors of her making senior partner before 35. I made appropriate sounds of interest while drafting an email to my development team about new features for our upcoming release. 2 days later, Dad called with his monthly dose of career advice. His timing was impeccable. I'd just gotten off a conference call with hospital administrators from Texas who wanted to implement Care Connect statewide. "Ruth, I've been thinking," he began, which was never a good sign. "You're smart enough to do more than bedside nursing. I spoke with Susan and she agrees. You could be a legal secretary at her firm. The pay is much better than what you're making now, and you'd be in a professional environment." I pulled up Care Connect's user dashboard while he talked. We'd just passed 50,000 active users with a daily engagement rate that would make social media platforms envious. "That's thoughtful, Dad, but I love what I do." "Love doesn't pay the bills, Ruth. Do you want to be 60 years old, still living paycheck to paycheck, still renting that small apartment? Your sister owns a penthouse, for God's sake." "I'm doing fine," I said, glancing around my apartment. It was modest, yes, but by choice. Every dollar I didn't spend on lifestyle inflation went back into the business. Fine isn't enough." His voice carried the frustration of a man who'd spent 3 decades trying to mold daughters into his image of success. "I sent you listings for legal secretary positions. The Harrison Group is hiring. They start at 55,000. That's got to be more than you're making now." It was less than I'd made in passive income that month from licensing deals, but I couldn't say that. "I'll look at them, Dad." "You always say that, but you never do anything about it. When are you going to get serious about your future?" The question hung between us, weighted with his disappointment. I thought about the meeting I had scheduled next week with the Children's Hospital Association, where I'd be presenting Care Connect as a potential nationwide solution. Pretty serious, I'd say. "I should go, Dad. Early shift tomorrow." "Of course," he said, defeat coloring his tone. "Just think about it, Ruth. It's not too late to make something of yourself." The universe has a sense of humor because 20 minutes after that call, I received an email that would have vindicated me completely if I'd chosen to share it. Tech Health magazine wanted to feature Care Connect in their Innovations to Watch issue. They'd noticed our rapid adoption rates and revolutionary approach to family-centered care coordination. But sharing would have meant explaining, and explaining would have meant dealing with their reactions. Would Dad suddenly support me? Or would he try to take over with advice? Would Susan offer her legal services, inserting herself into my success story? Would Mom tell everyone at church, turning my quiet revolution into family gossip? No, this was mine to build without their input, their doubts, or their belated approval. The magazine interview happened over video call from my bedroom, my certificate strategically placed in the background to look professional. The journalist, a sharp woman named Dana, asked probing questions about my journey from bedside nurse to tech entrepreneur. It's an unusual path, she noted. Most healthcare tech founders come from either pure tech or business backgrounds. What made you think you could bridge that gap? I thought about all the times my family had asked variations of the same question, though, with far less respect. Proximity to the problem, I answered. I lived these challenges every shift. I watched families struggle with coordination, saw how communication gaps led to medical errors, witnessed the exhaustion of parents trying to manage complex care. You can't truly solve a problem you've only studied in theory. Dana nodded, typing notes. Your adoption rates are remarkable. 50,000 users in under a year with virtually no marketing spend. How do you explain that? Word of mouth from families who finally feel heard, I said simply. When you solve a real problem, people talk. The article would run next month featuring Care Connect, alongside innovations from MIT graduates and Silicon Valley veterans. My photo would appear next to CEOs who'd raised millions in venture capital, and not one person would know it was the same Ruth Morrison who'd been pitied at last month's family barbecue. That barbecue had been particularly trying. Susan had arrived late as always, full of apologies and humble brags about depositions keeping her busy. She'd cornered me by the potato salad to share her latest relationship wisdom. I've been thinking about your situation, she said, loading her plate while eyeing my portion size. Maybe you're too focused on your little patients. Men find that kind of singular focus unattractive. Brad says you need to show more interest in the wider world. Politics, business, things that matter. I thought about the healthcare policy conference I'd attended virtually last week, where senators had discussed reforms that Care Connect was already addressing at the ground level. I'll keep that in mind. You should, and maybe update your wardrobe. I know nurses' salaries are tight, but you could shop at discount stores. First impressions matter, Ruth. You can't catch a quality man dressed like... She gestured vaguely at my comfortable sundress. That. Our cousin Jennifer had joined us then, 8 months pregnant and glowing. Don't listen to her, Ruth. You'll find someone when the time is right. Look at me. I met Todd when I'd completely given up. The conversation devolved into relationship advice from every married woman in attendance, each convinced they held the secret to fixing my tragically single life. No one asked about my work, my interests, my thoughts on anything beyond my marital status. To them, I was a problem to solve, not a person with accomplishments worth discussing. Later that evening, Mom pulled me aside in the kitchen. I worry about you, sweetheart. You're so isolated. Just work and that empty apartment. Don't you want more? I was closing in on my second million in revenue, had hired 5 contractors, and was fielding acquisition offers from major healthcare companies. I have everything I need, Mom. She touched my cheek with gentle sadness. No, honey, you have a job. Susan has a career. There's a difference. The difference, I thought, was that Susan's career was visible while mine was revolutionary. But I just hugged her and promised to think about the legal secretary positions, knowing the listings would go straight to my trash folder. 3 days after the barbecue, I was featured on a healthcare innovation podcast that reached hundreds of thousands of listeners. The host introduced me as the nurse who's quietly transforming pediatric care coordination across America. My family, of course, had no idea. They didn't listen to podcasts about healthcare innovation. They were too busy worrying about my empty ring finger and modest car. The blindness was so complete, it became almost comical. During a family dinner where Susan announced her latest courtroom victory, I received a text from my CFO. Yes, I now had a CFO, about our latest financial projections. We were on track to hit $10 million in annual recurring revenue by year's end. "Ruth, you're not even listening," Susan accused, noticing my glance at my phone. "Sorry, work thing," I mumbled, tucking the device away. Dad snorted. "What kind of work emergency does a nurse have? Someone need their pillow fluffed." The table laughed. I smiled and took another bite of Mom's meatloaf, thinking about the 12 hospitals implementing Care Connect that week, the hundreds of families whose lives would become easier, the medical errors that would be prevented by better coordination. Their blindness was my protection. Every dismissive comment, every pitying look, every suggestion about legal secretary positions just reinforced the wisdom of keeping my success private. They'd constructed such a complete narrative of my failure that they couldn't see the empire I was building right under their noses. And honestly, that's exactly how I wanted it. By spring, Care Connect had evolved from a promising startup into a genuine force in healthcare technology. The transformation happened so rapidly that I sometimes felt like a passenger in my own success story, watching developments unfold with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. But this was no accident. Every decision, every hire, every feature we built came from a deep understanding of what families like those I served truly needed. My first major hire was David Kim, a brilliant developer who'd been overlooked by bigger tech companies because he was self-taught. I found him through a coding forum where he'd posted elegant solutions to complex problems that others deemed impossible. When we met for coffee, he showed up in a worn, hoodie nervous energy radiating from every gesture. "I don't have a computer science degree," he admitted within the first 5 minutes, as if confessing a crime. "Everything I know comes from online courses and building projects for my nephew who has special needs." "Perfect," I said, watching his eyes widen in surprise. "I don't have a tech background either, but you understand why this matters. That's worth more than any degree." David became my technical co-founder, working remotely from his apartment in Michigan. His first contribution was an AI-driven predictive care feature that could flag potential complications before they became emergencies. The algorithm analyzed patterns in patient data medication, interactions, and symptom progressions to alert caregivers about concerns they might have missed. Next came Maria Gonzalez, a UX designer who'd spent years frustrated by healthcare apps that seemed designed by people who'd never been sick or cared for someone who was. She responded to my job posting with a redesign of our interface that made me tear up. It was intuitive, beautiful, and clearly created by someone who understood the emotional weight of managing a sick child's care. I watched my mother navigate my brother's autism therapies with 7 different apps that didn't talk to each other, Maria explained during our video interview. I swore that someday I'd fix that mess. Within months, our team grew to 12 people, all working remotely, all chosen for their combination of skill and personal investment in our mission. There was James, a back-end engineer whose daughter had survived childhood cancer and who understood the importance of rock-solid reliability. Sarah, a data analyst who'd spent years as a caregiver for her chronically ill parent. Marcus, a security expert whose paranoia about patient privacy bordered on obsessive, exactly what we needed. We worked 18-hour days, not because anyone demanded it, but because we all understood the weight of what we were building. Every feature we shipped meant fewer medical errors, less family stress, better outcomes for sick children. The motivation was built into the mission. My own days became a careful ballet of maintaining appearances while running a rapidly scaling company. I'd work my 3 12-hour hospital shifts, then spend my days off in back-to-back virtual meetings with investors, hospital systems, and potential partners. My apartment's second bedroom transformed into a makeshift office, though I was careful to keep the door closed whenever family visited. Not that they visited often. My success in hiding my venture had an unexpected side effect. My family saw less and less reason to check on poor Ruth. After all, what news could I possibly have? Another shift at the hospital, another quiet evening in my small apartment. Their disinterest became my freedom. The growth statistics were staggering. We hit 100,000 active users by May, with an average of 5,000 new families joining weekly. Our Net Promoter Score, a measure of user satisfaction, consistently ranked in the 90s, unheard of for healthcare technology. Hospital administrators who'd initially been skeptical were becoming evangelists, presenting case studies at conferences about improved patient outcomes since implementing Care Connect. Then came the moment that changed our trajectory entirely. I was eating a quick lunch between patient rounds when my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Ms. Morrison, this is Patricia Chen from Maverick Capital. We've been watching Care Connect's growth with great interest. I'd like to discuss a potential investment. Maverick Capital. Even with my limited knowledge of venture capital, I knew they were major players. Patricia's call led to a series of meetings that felt surreal, discussing valuations and growth projections while still wearing my cartoon character scrubs from the pediatric ward. The offer, when it came, was staggering $50 million for 20% equity, valuing Care Connect at $250 million. The number felt impossible, like a clerical error that someone would soon correct. But Patricia assured me it was real based on our user growth retention rates and the massive market we were addressing. You're solving a billion-dollar problem, she explained during one of our calls. The inefficiencies in pediatric care coordination cost the healthcare system enormous amounts annually. Your solution is elegant, scalable, and has proven product-market fit. Honestly, Ruth, we think this valuation is conservative. I negotiated the deal myself with guidance from Gregory and a lawyer he recommended. The process took 6 weeks of careful back and forth, ensuring I maintained control while getting the resources needed to scale. When I finally signed the papers, I was sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot, still in my scrubs, from a particularly difficult shift where we'd lost a young patient to complications that better care coordination might have prevented. The money hit different this time. $50 million in funding meant responsibility to my team, to our users, to the vision of transforming pediatric healthcare. I could no longer pretend this was just a side project. Care Connect was real, valuable, and growing faster than even my wildest dreams had imagined. But I maintained my routine. Hospital shifts 3 days a week, running a company worth $250 million the other 4. My Honda Civic still carried me between both worlds, though I'd fixed the rattling muffler that had embarrassed Susan so much at family gatherings. Speaking of family, Mom called the day after the funding closed, unaware that her younger daughter had just become CEO of a company valued at more than most of her friends' retirement accounts combined. "Ruth, honey, I was talking to Susan about your situation," she began, and I knew this would be painful. She mentioned that her firm is expanding their administrative staff. It's not a secretary position, it's an executive assistant role. The pay is $70,000. Can you imagine? I looked at my laptop screen where our CFO had sent projections showing we'd hit $100 million in valuation within 18 months. That sounds nice, Mom. Nice, Ruth, this could change your life. You could finally afford a better apartment, maybe even buy a condo, start building real equity instead of just getting by. The equity I just retained in Care Connect was worth more than every house on my parents' street combined. But I couldn't explain that without opening floodgates I wasn't ready to manage. I'll think about it, I said, my standard response to their suggestions. You always say that Mom's frustration bled through. When are you going to actually do something? Susan's trying to help you, Ruth. The least you could do is seem grateful. After we hung up, I sat in my small living room looking around at the space that had witnessed the birth of something extraordinary. The second-hand couch where I'd coded my first prototype. The kitchen table still marked with coffee rings from late-night strategy sessions. The wall where I'd taped user feedback that motivated me through the hardest days. This apartment, which my family saw as evidence of my failure, had been my incubator. Every modest square foot was sacred to me, now infused with the memory of building something from nothing. But change was coming whether I wanted it or not. Care Connect needed a real headquarters. My team deserved to work together in person. And eventually, the truth about what I'd built would surface. The question was, would I control that revelation, or would it control me? For now, though, I had a company to run and sick children to care for. The empire could remain secret a little longer. After all, the best revenge isn't just success. It's success on your own terms, revealed in your own time. The expansion wasn't just about growing a company. It was about proving that a pediatric nurse from Ohio could build something that mattered on a scale my family couldn't even imagine. Every new hospital that signed on, every family whose life became easier, every child who received better coordinated care, they were all testaments to what's possible when you stop seeking approval and start solving problems. $50 million in funding was just fuel for the fire. The real expansion was in my understanding of what I was capable of when I stopped letting others define my limits. The wedding was supposed to be Susan's crowning achievement. A June ceremony at the Ritz-Carlton that would solidify her position as the family success story. She'd been engaged to Brad Wellington for 3 years, their relationship a carefully curated display of ambition meeting privilege. Brad was everything our father approved of: surgical resident at Cleveland Clinic, old money family golf handicap that opened doors at the right clubs. But that April evening at our cousin Emma's wedding, I watched the first visible cracks appear in Susan's flawless facade. The reception was in full swing at the Riverside Country Club when I noticed Susan wasn't at the head table with Brad. I found her in the bathroom, standing at the sink with her hands gripping the marble counter designer mascara, creating dark rivers down her cheeks. "Susan," I approached cautiously, unused to seeing my composed sister anything less than perfect. "What's wrong?" She looked up, meeting my eyes in the mirror, and for a moment I saw past the senior associate attorney to the girl who used to cry when she got an A- in high school. "Nothing," she said automatically, then laughed bitterly. "Everything's perfect. I'm perfect. Brad's perfect. Our life is fucking perfect." The profanity shocked me more than the tears. Susan never cursed, considering it unprofessional. I handed her a tissue from the basket by the mirror. "Do you want to talk about it?" She dabbed at her eyes carefully, trying to salvage her makeup. "What's there to talk about? I have everything right." The career dad always wanted the fiancé. Everyone envies the penthouse with city views. I'm living the dream. Her voice cracked on the last word. We stood in silence, the muffled sounds of the reception filtering through the door. Finally, she spoke again. "I haven't slept properly in 6 months. I take Xanax to get through partner meetings and Adderall to bill enough hours. I see Brad maybe twice a week, and when we do talk, it's about his career or mine, never about us, whatever us even means anymore." This vulnerability from Susan was so unexpected I almost didn't know how to respond. "Have you talked to Brad about how you're feeling?" She laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. "Brad postponed our wedding again last week. 3rd time. He says his fellowship is too demanding right now, but I know the truth. I heard him on the phone with someone making dinner plans. He said he had to work late, but I could hear restaurant sounds in the background." My stomach dropped. I'd suspected Brad wasn't faithful since seeing him exchange numbers with a pharmaceutical rep at Thanksgiving, but I'd hoped I was wrong. Maybe there's an explanation, I offered weakly. Susan finally turned from the mirror to face me directly. There is. He's seeing someone else, probably one of the young residents who still has energy to be impressed by his surgical stories. I'm just too tired to care anymore. Then why stay with him? Her smile was sharp enough to cut. Because I'm Susan Morrison. I don't fail. I don't get left. I'm the one who has it all together. Remember? What would Dad say if his golden child couldn't even keep a man? The bathroom door opened and two cousins entered, chattering about the band. Susan immediately straightened, swiping under her eyes one final time and painting on a smile that looked convincing if you didn't know where to look. "We should get back," she said, smoothing her dress. "People will notice if I'm gone too long." As we returned to the reception, she grabbed my arm. "Don't tell anyone about this, especially not Mom or Dad." I watched her glide back to the head table, kiss Brad's cheek for the photographers, and resume her role as the perfect couple's female half. But now I could see what I'd missed before. The tension in her shoulders, the way Brad barely acknowledged her touch, how her smile never quite reached her eyes. 2 weeks later, at a Thursday family dinner, Susan arrived, looking polished as ever, in a new suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But I noticed the concealer heavy under her eyes, the way she pushed food around her plate without eating. "The Pemberton acquisition is moving forward," she announced, accepting Dad's approving nod. "I'll be lead counsel on the integration team." Brilliant, Dad beamed. "That's what I like to hear. Ruth, are you taking notes? This is what ambition looks like." I thought about the 3 acquisition offers I'd turned down that week for Care Connect, each one more lucrative than the last, but I just nodded and passed the green beans. After dinner, I helped Mom clear plates while Dad and Susan discussed legal strategies in his study. Through the window, I saw Brad pull up in his Mercedes to collect Susan. He didn't come to the door, just waited in the car, scrolling through his phone. "Such a catch!" Mom sighed, watching Susan gather her things. "Brad's gonna make an excellent husband. Susan really did well for herself." I watched my sister walk to the car designer heels, clicking on the driveway and slide into the passenger seat. Brad didn't look up from his phone. They drove away in silence. I could see even from the kitchen window. The next morning, I had coffee with Teresa Martins to discuss expanding our partnership. She mentioned seeing Susan at a legal conference the previous week. "Your sister seemed stressed," Teresa said carefully. "She gave a brilliant presentation on healthcare mergers, but afterward, I saw her in the hotel bar alone at 2 a.m., still in her conference attire. Is she all right?" I thought about Susan's bathroom confession about the pills she took to function, about Brad's wandering attention. She's managing a lot right now. Teresa nodded knowingly. "The senior associate years are brutal. I remember working 100-hour weeks thinking success would feel different when I achieved it. Sometimes the view from the top isn't what we expected." That evening, Susan called me, a rare occurrence. Her voice sounded thick, like she'd been drinking. "Ruth, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you happy? I mean really happy, not successful or accomplished or whatever Dad measures, but actually happy." I looked around my small apartment, thought about my morning at the hospital where young Jamie had finally been discharged after 6 months of treatment, about the email from a mother thanking me for creating Care Connect because it helped her manage her daughter's care without losing her job. "Yeah," I said honestly, "I am." Silence stretched between us. Finally, Susan spoke, her voice small. "I don't think I remember what that feels like." "Susan!" "I have to go. Brad's calling, probably canceling our date again. Thanks. She hung up before I could respond. I stared at my phone, wondering how we'd gotten here, the golden child crumbling under the weight of perfection, while the disappointment built something meaningful in secret. The irony wasn't lost on me. Susan had everything our family valued: the prestigious career, the successful fiancé, the visible markers of achievement. but she was miserable, medicating herself through days that brought no joy, engaged to a man who treated her like an accessory to his own ambitions. Meanwhile, I had none of what they measured as success, yet I woke up excited about each day. My work mattered, my team respected me, my life had purpose beyond billable hours and status symbols. But I couldn't share this reversal with anyone. Susan had sworn me to secrecy about her struggles, just as I kept my success hidden. We were both performing versions of ourselves for an audience that had already decided who we were supposed to be. 3 days later, gossip reached me through cousin Jennifer. Someone had seen Brad at a restaurant with a young woman who definitely wasn't Susan. They were holding hands across the table, Brad's engagement ring nowhere in sight. I thought about calling Susan, warning her, but what would be the point? She already knew. She was choosing the performance over the truth, the image over the reality, just like I was in my own way. The difference was that my performance protected something worth building. Hers was slowly destroying her from the inside out. But everyone has to reach their own breaking point. Susan wasn't there yet, still believing that success meant never admitting failure, that perfection was worth any price. I'd learned differently through Mark's betrayal and Dad's dismissal. Sometimes the biggest success is having the courage to define victory for yourself. The call came at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, jarring me awake in my modest bedroom. My phone displayed an unknown California number, and my first instinct was to ignore it. But something says, maybe entrepreneurial instinct, maybe fate, made me answer. Ruth Morrison. The voice was crisp, professional, with that particular Silicon Valley inflection I'd grown familiar with. This is Jennifer Wu from Andreessen Horowitz. I apologize for the early call, but we've been tracking Care Connect's metrics. Your growth is extraordinary. We need to talk. Andreessen Horowitz. Even in my half-awake state, I recognized the name. They'd funded some of the biggest names in tech, turned startups into household names. Jennifer's call led to a whirlwind week of due diligence, virtual meetings with partners, and deep dives into our technology and vision. The final meeting happened on a Friday afternoon. I took the video call from my car in the hospital parking garage, having just finished a shift where I'd helped stabilize a premature infant. The contrast between worlds, NICU intensity to venture capital negotiations, had become my normal. We want to lead your Series B, Jennifer announced without preamble. $50 million at a $250 million valuation. But Ruth, that's conservative. We think Care Connect could be a unicorn within 2 years. A unicorn, a billion-dollar company, started by a pediatric nurse in Ohio. I managed to maintain professional composure through the rest of the call, but afterward, I sat in my Honda Civic and laughed until tears came. Not because it was funny, but because the absurdity of it all. My family pitying me while Silicon Valley's premier venture firm was betting millions on my vision was too much to process any other way. The funding process moved quickly. Within 3 weeks, we negotiated terms that gave me everything I wanted, maintained control resources to scale nationally, and partners who understood our mission, went beyond profits. The wire transfer notification arrived while I was placing an IV in a dehydrated toddler. $50 million deposited while I performed a procedure any nurse could do. But the real breakthrough wasn't the money. It was what happened next. Care Connect's AI-driven predictive care system, the feature David had built from his apartment, started showing remarkable results. At Seattle Children's Hospital, our algorithm flagged a subtle pattern in 8-year-old Maya's vitals that suggested early organ rejection after her kidney transplant, 3 days before traditional monitoring would have caught it. The early intervention saved her life. At Boston Medical Center, the system identified a medication interaction that 5 different specialists had missed in a complex case. In Atlanta, it predicted sepsis in a premature infant 12 hours before symptoms appeared, allowing preventive treatment. The medical community took notice. The New England Journal of Medicine requested data for a study. the American Academy of Pediatrics invited me to present at their annual conference. Suddenly, Care Connect wasn't just a helpful app. It was becoming essential infrastructure for modern pediatric care. I hired Dr. Patricia Okoye as our chief medical officer, a brilliant pediatrician who'd grown frustrated with the healthcare system's inefficiencies. She brought credibility and deep clinical knowledge that complemented our technical innovation. "You've done something remarkable here," she told me during our first meeting. "You've built technology that actually serves healthcare providers instead of adding to their burden. Do you know how rare that is?" Our team grew to 50 people, all remote or all mission-driven. We established a small physical headquarters in Columbus, close enough to visit when needed, but far enough from my family's suburb to maintain separation. The office was modest, focused on function over flash. No ping-pong tables or beer taps, just dedicated people solving real problems. The breakthrough momentum was intoxicating. Major hospital systems started approaching us instead of the other way around. Our user base hit 500,000 families. Revenue projections showed a clear path to profitability, almost unheard of for a healthcare startup our age. But perhaps the most meaningful breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Linda Chen, Zachary's mother who'd inspired this entire journey, sent me a video message. Zachary, now 10 and thriving, despite his complex medical needs, had created a presentation for his school about Care Connect. "This app saved my life," he said simply to his 4th grade class, "not because it's medicine, but because it helps my mom help me. And when my mom's not scared, I'm not scared." I watched that video in my apartment, sobbing into a cup of tea. This was why we built Care Connect. Not for valuations or acquisitions, but for kids like Zachary who deserved better than a fragmented system held together by exhausted parents and paper records. Meanwhile, my family remained blissfully unaware. At Sunday dinner the week after our funding closed, Dad spent 20 minutes lecturing me about financial planning. "You need to start thinking about retirement, Ruth," he said, cutting his pot roast with surgical precision. "Nurses don't have the pension systems they used to. Susan's already maxing out her 401k and has a diversified portfolio. What's your plan?" My plan included stock options worth more than his entire retirement account, but I just nodded. "I'm working on it, Dad." Susan looked exhausted across the table, her 3rd glass of wine barely touched. She'd been quieter lately, the manic energy of overachievement replaced by something hollow. Brad hadn't come to family dinner in months, always citing surgery schedules. "Ruth's being smart," Susan said, suddenly surprising everyone. "Not everyone needs to chase the brass ring. Sometimes simple is better." Dad frowned. "That doesn't sound like the daughter I raised. Excellence should always be the goal." Susan laughed, but it had an edge. "Excellence. Right, because that's worked out so well." An awkward silence fell. Mom quickly changed the subject to Cousin Michael's new baby, but I caught Susan's eye. She looked grateful for my earlier defense, even if she didn't understand why I'd offered it. After dinner, I helped Mom with dishes, while Dad showed Susan some legal precedent he thought might help her case. Through the window, I could see them in his study, Susan nodding mechanically while scrolling through her phone, the golden child going through the motions. "I worry about your sister," Mom said quietly, hands deep in soapy water. "She seems stretched thin lately." "She's managing a lot," I replied carefully. "At least she has, Brad," Mom sighed. "Such a devoted fiancé, always working hard to build their future." I thought about the rumors of Brad with other women, about Susan's wine consumption, about the pills I'd seen her slip into her purse. Building a future, indeed. That night, I received an email that made everything else fade into background noise. The Children's Hospital Association wanted to make Care Connect their recommended platform for all member hospitals. 3,000 facilities, 15 million potential users. I sat in my small living room laptop, warm on my legs, staring at words that represented the breakthrough we'd worked so hard to achieve. Not just success, but impact at a scale I'd never dared imagine. My phone buzzed. Gregory, my first mentor, sending a simple message, saw the news about CHA. Remember when you thought nobody would use your little app? Proud of you, Ruth. Pride. Such a different feeling from the desperate need for approval that had driven my early years. This pride came from within, from knowing we'd built something that mattered, that saved lives, that made the hardest job in the world, caring for a sick child, just a little bit easier. The breakthrough wasn't just professional, it was personal. I'd proven to myself that vision, determination, and genuine care for solving real problems could triumph over prestigious degrees and family connections. That a nurse from Ohio could build something Silicon Valley respected. That success didn't require anyone else's definition but your own. Tomorrow, I'd go back to the hospital for my shift. I'd place IVs, comfort frightened parents, advocate for tiny patients who couldn't speak for themselves. But I'd do it, knowing that my other life, the secret one where I was CEO of a revolutionary healthcare company, was making that same kind of care possible for millions. The breakthrough was complete. Now came the harder part, deciding when and how to break through the elaborate facade I'd maintained with my family. But that revelation could wait. For tonight, I sat in my apartment that everyone pitied, surrounded by the invisible empire I'd built, and felt nothing but gratitude. The intervention was Mom's idea, though she'd never call it that. Just a little lunch, she'd said on the phone, her voice carrying that forced casualness that immediately put me on alert. You, me, and Susan, girls only. Won't that be nice? I knew something was wrong when she suggested meeting at the Fairmont Hotel's restaurant, the place she only booked for serious occasions, divorce announcements, cancer diagnoses, apparently now her profound concern for her younger daughter's life choices. I arrived to find them already seated, heads bent together in conspiracy that ceased the moment they spotted me. Mom wore her pearl necklace, the one Dad bought for their 25th anniversary. Susan looked polished, but hollow, like expensive fruit that's perfect on the outside, but rotting within. Ruth, sweetheart. Mom stood to hug me, holding on a beat too long. You look tired. Are you eating enough? I'd been up until 3 a.m. finalizing our nationwide rollout strategy, but I just smiled. I'm fine, Mom. Just busy at work. That's actually what we wanted to discuss, Susan said, getting straight to the point with her lawyer's efficiency. She pulled out an iPad, swiping to what looked like a prepared presentation. I've taken the liberty of researching opportunities for you. My stomach sank. Opportunities. Career advancement options, she clarified, turning the screen toward me. Look, I've identified 17 positions at healthcare companies where your nursing background would be an asset, but you could transition into corporate work. Better hours, better pay, better future. The irony of her showing me entry-level positions at companies that were actively trying to license Care Connect technology would have been funny if it weren't so sad. I recognized 3 companies on her list that my business development team had meetings with that week. Susan, I appreciate. No, Ruth. Listen, Mom interrupted, reaching across the table to grasp my hand. We're worried. You're 32, single, living in that tiny apartment, working yourself to exhaustion for what, $45,000 a year. My salary from the hospital was actually $60,000, but I didn't correct her. The $5 million I'd paid myself in CEO compensation last year wasn't relevant to this conversation. Oh, you have no savings. Susan continued, swiping to a new slide that appeared to be a financial projection of my theoretical future. At your current trajectory, you'll never be able to buy property, never be able to retire comfortably. And dating. How can you even meet someone working those horrible shifts? I meet people, I said mildly. Oh, well, who other nurses? Respiratory therapists. Susan's tone carried the kind of professional snobbery that made me understand why she was so miserable. Ruth, you need to be strategic about your future. You can't just drift along hoping things will work out. Like I said at Cousin Emma's wedding, I can get you an interview at my firm. Susan continued, her fingers flying across the iPad. Executive assistant to the senior partners. 75,000 to start full benefits regular hours. You'd be in a professional environment around successful people. Mom nodded eagerly. And who knows, you might meet someone. Susan says there are several eligible men at the firm. Divorced men, I said, remembering her previous attempts to set me up. So, Mom's desperation bled through. You're divorced, too. You can't be picky at this stage, Ruth. At this stage, like I was produce about to expire. The waiter appeared and we paused to order. I chose the salmon, thinking about the team lunch I'd hosted yesterday at a Michelin-starred restaurant to celebrate our latest milestone. My employees would die laughing if they knew I was being counseled on my dire financial future. Once the waiter left, Susan pulled up another screen. I've also looked into MBA programs you could do part-time. I know the academics might be challenging for you, but with support? I have an MBA, I said quietly. The silence was deafening. Susan's finger froze mid-swipe. Mom's water glass stopped halfway to her lips. Well, what? Susan's voice cracked slightly. How? Northwestern, graduated 6 months ago. But you never said anything, Mom sputtered. Why wouldn't you tell us? Because you would have made it about you, I thought. Because Dad would have taken credit for inspiring me. Because Susan would have found a way to diminish it or compete with it. I was busy, I said instead. It didn't seem important to mention. Susan recovered, first her lawyer instincts kicking in. Well, that's good, but what are you doing with it? An MBA is useless if you're still just working bedside nursing. Maybe I like bedside nursing. Nobody likes bedside nursing that much. Susan snapped, then caught herself. I mean, it's admirable, but Ruth, you have to think bigger. With an MBA, you could be in hospital administration, health insurance consulting. Real careers with real futures. I thought about the board meeting I'd attended that morning via video where we'd approved a $10 million R&D budget for the next quarter. Pretty real, I'd say. I'll think about it, I said, my standard deflection. You always say that. Mom's frustration finally boiled over. Ruth, we're trying to help you. Do you want to be 60 years old alone, still emptying bedpans? Mom, no, she needs to hear this. Susan interrupted, her own composure cracking. Ruth, I watch you drift through life like nothing matters, and it kills me. I work 100-hour weeks, I network, I strategize every career move, and for what? So you can waste your potential out of some misguided sense of nobility. Her voice had risen enough that nearby diners glanced over. Susan noticed and lowered her tone, but the damage was done. I saw it clearly now. This intervention wasn't really about me. It was about Susan needing to believe her sacrifices meant something, that the life she'd built at such personal cost was worth more than my supposedly simple existence. I have a proposal, Susan said, pulling herself together with visible effort. There's a healthcare consulting firm that's a client of ours. Pemberton Associates. They're hiring for a senior analyst position. 6 figures, full benefits partnership track. I've already spoken to the hiring manager. She slid a business card across the table. Michael Pemberton. I recognize the name. His firm had pitched Care Connect for a partnership last month. We'd turned them down because their vision didn't align with ours. He's expecting your call, Susan continued. This is a real opportunity, Ruth. Don't throw it away out of pride. Pride. If only they knew that pride had nothing to do with it. I'll consider it, I said, pocketing the card I'd never use. The rest of lunch passed in strained conversation. Mom talked about her book club's latest selection. Susan checked her phone constantly, frowning at emails. I ate my salmon and wondered how different this meal would be if they knew the truth. As we prepared to leave, Mom made one last attempt. Ruth, sweetheart, we love you. That's why we're doing this. We just want you to have the life you deserve." "I know, Mom," I said, hugging her. "I love you too." Susan's hug was stiffer, more obligatory. "Call Michael," she whispered. "Please, for once in your life, take the help that's offered." I watched them leave together, Mom's arm linked through Susan's, their heads already bent together in discussion about my stubbornness. They looked like a united front, but I could see the cracks. Mom's desperate need to fix one daughter because she couldn't fix the other, Susan's compulsion to drag me up to her level of misery so she wouldn't feel alone up there. My phone buzzed. A text from David, my technical co-founder. "Holy shit, Ruth. TechCrunch wants to do a feature, calling us the most innovative healthcare startup of the year. Do I say yes?" I stood outside the Fairmont watching my family's car disappear into traffic and typed back, "Not yet. Soon, but not yet." The pressure to conform to visible success to their definition of achievement had never been stronger, but neither had my resolve to do this on my own terms. The empire remained hidden, but its foundations were unshakable. Let them plan interventions and career strategies. Let them worry about my empty ring finger and modest apartment. Soon enough, they'd understand that sometimes the biggest successes come from refusing to meet anyone's expectations but your own. But not yet. For now, I had a company to run, lives to save, and a revolution to finish building. The family pressure could intensify all it wanted. I'd weathered worse storms than their disappointment. The Silicon Valley offer arrived on a Thursday morning while I was reviewing patient charts. My phone lit up with a call from Jennifer Wu at Andreessen Horowitz, her excitement palpable even through the digital connection. "Ruth, I need you to sit down for this," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Nexus Ventures wants in. They're offering $50 million for 20%. But here's the kicker. It values Care Connect at $250 million. I was already sitting, fortunately, in the break room at the hospital, where I ducked away for privacy. $250 million. The number felt surreal, like something from a different universe than the one where I'd just helped change bedpans and comfort a crying toddler. That's substantial. I managed my voice remarkably steady for someone whose net worth had just jumped into the stratosphere. "Substantial," Jennifer laughed. "Ruth, this makes you one of the most successful female founders in healthcare technology. Your personal stake is worth over $100 million. You've built a unicorn trajectory company in under 2 years." After the call, I sat in that sterile break room, staring at the motivational posters about hand washing and proper lifting techniques, trying to process how I'd gone from the family disappointment to a 100-millionaire while changing absolutely nothing about my visible life. The funding round closed quickly. I structured it through multiple holding companies, maintaining privacy while ensuring maximum strategic flexibility. My lawyer, now a team of lawyers, handled the complexities while I maintained my regular hospital shifts, showing up in the same scrubs, driving the same Honda Civic, living in the same one-bedroom apartment. The discipline of maintaining normalcy had become almost meditative. Every luxury I denied myself was a choice to reinvest in the mission. Every time I parked next to a colleague's BMW in my aging Honda, I thought about the pediatric innovations that money could fund instead. But some changes were necessary. I quietly paid off my mortgage, structuring it through an LLC so the records wouldn't immediately connect to me. The relief of owning my small apartment outright was profound, not because I needed to save the money, but because it represented true independence. No matter what happened, I had a home that was mine. I also made strategic investments, not in visible assets, but in things that mattered. I funded nursing scholarships anonymously at my alma mater. I donated new equipment to the pediatric ward where I worked, letting administrators think it came from a grateful patient's family. I set up trusts for my future, for potential children, for causes I cared about, all managed by financial advisors who knew me only as a client number. The most challenging aspect was continuing to work at the hospital while running a company now valued at $250 million. I'd reduced my shifts to 2 days a week, telling everyone I was taking some personal time to recover from burnout. In reality, those 5 other days were packed with CEO duties, strategy sessions, investor meetings, product development, team building. My apartment's second bedroom had evolved from makeshift office to command center. Multiple monitors displayed real-time dashboards of CareConnect's performance, user growth curves that would make any startup founder weep with joy, engagement metrics that proved we weren't just attracting users, but genuinely improving lives. During one particularly long Tuesday, I was deep in a complex negotiation with a pharmaceutical company about integration partnerships when my phone rang. Mom. I muted the conference call where my CFO was handling the numbers brilliantly and answered, "Hi, Mom. Ruth, perfect timing. I'm at Costco and they have those protein bars you like on sale. Should I grab you some boxes? I know money's tight with your reduced hours." I glanced at my laptop screen where we were discussing a deal worth approximately $8 million annually. "That's sweet, Mom. Sure, I'll pay you back." "Don't be silly. Let me do this for you. Oh, and Dad wants to know if you called that Michael Pemberton yet. Susan says he's waiting to hear from you." "I've been busy," I said, watching my team expertly navigate the pharmaceutical executives through our terms. "Too busy for your future. Ruth, opportunities like this don't come along often for people in your situation." My situation? If she only knew that Michael Pemberton had sent 3 emails in the last week not to interview me, but to beg for a meeting about how CareConnect could transform his firm's entire healthcare consulting practice. "I'll handle it, Mom. Thanks for the protein bars." After she hung up, I unmuted to find my CFO had negotiated even better terms than we'd hoped. $8.5 million annually with performance bonuses that could take it to 10. I approved with a nod, then went back to reviewing code for our latest feature release. The duality of my life had become almost comical. In the morning, I'd be on CNBC's Startup Spotlight, face-obscured voice, altered, identified only as CareConnect founder, discussing the future of healthcare technology. By afternoon, I'd be at the hospital, helping orient new nurses who had no idea their preceptor had just been featured in Fortune's 40 Under 40 to Watch list name, withheld by request. My assistant. Yes, I now had an assistant, though she worked remotely and knew me only through encrypted communications, managed my CEO calendar with military precision, board meetings via secure video, product reviews with the development team, strategic planning sessions with advisors, all carefully scheduled around my hospital shifts and family obligations. The success metrics were staggering. We'd reached 1 million active users. Our AI had prevented an estimated 10,000 medication errors. Hospital systems reported 30% improvements in care coordination efficiency. The pediatric health outcomes in our partner facilities showed measurable improvements that had researchers scrambling to study our model. But the moment that made it all real came from an unexpected source. I was restocking supplies in the pediatric unit when Dr. Patricia Hendricks, our chief of pediatrics, pulled me aside. "Ruth, I need to thank you," she said, looking uncharacteristically emotional. My heart stopped. Had she discovered my identity? For what? "For recommending that CareConnect system to the administration. I know you don't take credit, but Jennifer in IT mentioned you were the one who suggested it. It's transformed how we deliver care. Do you know we haven't had a single medication coordination error since implementation?" I did know because I reviewed those statistics every morning, but I just smiled and shrugged. I heard good things about it. Glad it's working out. Dr. Hendricks studied me with the sharp intelligence that made her excellent at her job. "You know the founder remains anonymous, but rumor is she's a nurse. Imagine that. A nurse building something that's revolutionizing pediatric care nationwide. Gives you hope, doesn't it?" "Yeah," I said softly, "it really does. That evening, Susan called while I was reviewing acquisition offers. 3 more companies wanted to buy Care Connect, each offering more ridiculous sums than the last. I put her on speaker while declining a $200 million offer that undervalued our potential. "Did you call Michael?" she asked without preamble. "He texted asking if you were still interested." "Been swamped," I said, typing a response to our head of business development about why we weren't selling yet. "Ruth, you can't be swamped with bedpan duty. This is your future we're talking about." "I know exactly what my future looks like," I said, then caught myself. I'm working on it." Susan sighed dramatically. "Brad and I were just discussing this. We think you're depressed. It's the only explanation for this complete lack of ambition." Brad, who I'd learned through industry gossip, was about to lose his surgical position due to multiple complaints about his behavior with female residents. But Susan didn't know that yet, still clinging to the image of her perfect fiancé. "I'm not depressed," I said, approving a $3 million budget for pediatric health research we were funding at Johns Hopkins. "Then what is it? Why won't you let us help you? Do you enjoy watching everyone else succeed while you just exist?" I thought about my morning, which had started with a call from the White House's healthcare innovation team wanting to feature Care Connect in their national strategy. I'm not just existing, Susan. I'm living exactly the life I want. In that tiny apartment, with that ancient car working holidays and weekends at the hospital, her voice carried genuine bewilderment. "What kind of life is that?" "The kind where I make a real difference," I thought. "The kind where sick kids get better care because of something I built. The kind where my work matters beyond billable hours and client dinners." "My kind," I said simply. After we hung up, I made a decision. The next morning, I would walk into that Thanksgiving dinner with proof of my success, not to gloat or seek validation, but to finally end the exhausting charade of being their disappointment. I pulled up my mortgage documents, the ones showing "paid in full" in beautiful bold letters. Such a small thing compared to Care Connect's valuation, but something they'd understand. A concrete proof that their poor, struggling Ruth had more stability than they'd ever imagined. The hidden success had grown too large to contain. Tomorrow the secret would end. But tonight I sat in my modest apartment that I owned outright, running a company worth more than every house in my parents' neighborhood, and felt nothing but peace. Success, I'd learned, was sweetest when you achieved it for yourself, not for applause. The call came at 2 a.m, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. I'd been deep in sleep after a particularly long day, split between a difficult shift and a board meeting when my phone's insistent ringing dragged me back to consciousness. Susan's name on the screen made my stomach drop. She never called, especially not at this hour. "Ruth." Her voice was small, broken in a way I'd never heard before. I'm at the airport Marriott. Can you come, please?" I was already pulling on jeans, shoving my feet into sneakers. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "Brad left." The words came out in a sob. "He's gone. Moved out while I was at a deposition. Changed the locks on the apartment. I don't know what to do." "I'll be there in 20 minutes. I found her in the lobby, still wearing her courtroom suit, but looking like a stranger in her own skin. Her usually perfect hair hung limp, her makeup smeared beyond recognition. She clutched a small overnight bag, apparently all she'd managed to take from the apartment they'd shared. "He texted me," she said as I guided her to my car. "A fucking text message, Ruth. 3 years together, and he ends it with a text saying he's been seeing Melissa." "Who's Melissa?" "Surgical resident, 26, perky." Susan laughed bitterly. "Everything I'm not anymore." I drove us back to my apartment in silence, Susan staring out the window at the city lights. When we arrived, she looked around my small space with eyes that seemed to see it for the first time. "It's nice here," she said quietly. "Peaceful. Make yourself at home, the couch pulls out." Ruth, She stopped, shoulders shaking. I can't afford a hotel. The apartment was in Brad's name. My credit cards are maxed from trying to keep up with the lifestyle he wanted. I've been living paycheck to paycheck despite making $200,000 a year because everything went to maintaining this image of success. I made her tea while she talked the whole story, spilling out in waves. The designer clothes bought on credit. The vacations they couldn't afford but took anyway, because that's what power couples do. The apartment with city views that ate up 60% of her income. The weekend trips, the charity galas, the constant performance of prosperity that had left her financially and emotionally bankrupt. I haven't slept properly in over a year, she admitted, clutching the mug like a lifeline. The Xanax stopped working, so I moved to Ambien. The Adderall keeps me functional for 20-hour days, but I need wine to come down. I'm a walking pharmacy, Ruth. Have you talked to anyone, a therapist? Susan's laugh was sharp. When between the 100-hour weeks and maintaining Brad's social calendar, besides, what would people say? Susan Morrison in therapy, the golden child cracking up. We sat in my small living room, two sisters who'd taken such different paths, and I saw her clearly for perhaps the first time in years. Not the success story or the favorite daughter, but a woman drowning in expectations she'd never questioned. I've been thinking about quitting, she said suddenly. The law, all of it, just walking away. What would you do instead? I don't know. That's the terrifying part. I've been Susan Morrison, attorney at law, for so long, I don't know who else I could be. She looked at me with eyes that held too much pain. How do you do it, Ruth? How do you just not care what anyone thinks? I care, I said carefully. I just decided my own opinion matters more than theirs. The next few days revealed the full extent of Susan's crisis. She'd been hiding devastating financial problems beneath her successful facade. The student loans she'd refinanced multiple times to lower payments but extend the debt. The credit card balances that had spiraled out of control. The fact that despite her high salary, she had less than $1,000 in savings. I bill $3,000 an hour for clients, she said one evening, going through her finances on my laptop, but I can't afford my own life. More troubling were the professional cracks. Susan admitted she'd been making mistakes at work, missing deadlines, confusing case details, falling asleep during partner meetings. The Pemberton acquisition she'd bragged about was actually in jeopardy because she'd overlooked a crucial regulatory filing. They're watching me now, she confessed. Performance improvement plan, that's corporate speak for, we're building a case to fire you. What are you going to do? She was quiet for a long moment. I need help, Ruth. Real help. Not another pill or productivity hack, but actual help. I found her a therapist who specialized in professional burnout, paying for it quietly through one of my healthcare initiatives. Susan started attending daily AA meetings, admitting that her wine to unwind had become a bottle or more every night. She took medical leave from the firm, citing exhaustion. Dad's reaction was predictably awful. He showed up at my apartment on day 3 of Susan's stay, face purple with indignation. What have you done to her? He demanded, pushing past me into the living room where Susan sat in borrowed pajamas, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Dad, Susan started. No, you're coming home. This is ridiculous. Staying in this, he gestured around my apartment with disgust, place. What will people think? I don't care what people think, Susan said quietly. Don't be absurd. You're a Morrison. We have standards. Brad called me, you know. He's willing to discuss reconciliation if you get help for your issues. My issues? Susan stood shaking but determined. My issues are that I've spent 35 years trying to be who you wanted instead of who I am. My issues are that I'm addicted to pills and alcohol because that's the only way I could meet your impossible standards. My issues are that I let a man treat me like an accessory because you taught me that's what successful women do. The silence was deafening. Dad's face cycled through emotions, shock, anger, denial, before settling on cold dismissal. When you're ready to be reasonable, you know where to find us, he said, turning to leave. At the door, he looked back at me. I suppose you're happy now? Both my daughter's failures. After he left, Susan broke down completely. I held her while she sobbed, this brilliant woman who'd achieved everything our family valued and found it worthless. We stayed up all night talking, really talking, for the first time in years. I used to resent you, she admitted as dawn broke outside my window. You just opted out of the race, and somehow you were fine. Happy even. I couldn't understand it. I'm not perfect, Susan. I just chose different battles. She smiled weakly. Your battles didn't require Xanax. Over the next week, Susan slowly began to rebuild. She contacted a financial advisor to consolidate her debts. She hired a lawyer, not from her firm, to handle the messy separation from Brad and recover her belongings. She attended therapy, went to meetings, and slowly began to look like herself again. I want to do something that matters, she said one evening, looking through job postings on her laptop. Not just billable hours and corporate mergers, something real. I thought about the foundation I'd been planning to launch, focus on healthcare access for underserved communities. It would need legal expertise, someone who understood both corporate structures and had a genuine desire to help. I might know of something, I said carefully, when you're ready. Yeah. Her eyes held hope for the first time in days. Something where being a Morrison isn't a prerequisite. Something where being Susan is enough. She stayed with me for 2 weeks, sleeping on my pull-out couch, wearing my clothes, eating simple meals I cooked between shifts and CEO duties she knew nothing about. It was the closest we'd been since childhood, before success and failure became the metrics by which we measured our worth. The night before she moved into her new apartment, a modest 1-bedroom she could actually afford, she hugged me tight. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. Always, I said, meaning it. Susan's crisis had cracked the family facade wide open. The golden child had fallen, and in falling found something real. It gave me hope that when my own truth came out, she at least might understand that success comes in many forms, and the most important victories are often invisible to those who only look at surfaces. The week before Thanksgiving arrived with the kind of crisp Ohio weather that made everything feel like a fresh start. Susan had been living in her new apartment for a month, slowly rebuilding her life with a quiet determination I'd never seen in her before. She'd taken a position with a legal aid nonprofit, making a quarter of her previous salary but sleeping through the night for the first time in years. I was preparing for what would be the most significant Thanksgiving of my life, gathering the documents that would finally end the charade. But first, I had something important to do. I need to tell you something, I said to Susan over coffee at her modest apartment. The space was small but bright, decorated with second-hand furniture and plants she'd learned to keep alive. Before Thursday, before everyone else knows. She looked up from her mug, clear-eyed in a way that months of sobriety had gifted her. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's actually incredibly right. I took a breath. Susan, I haven't been honest with you. With anyone in the family, I built something and it's become bigger than I ever imagined. I told her everything. Care Connect. The late nights coding, the mentor who believed in me, the contracts, the funding rounds, the valuation that now approached $300 million. I showed her articles about our company, the lives we'd saved, the innovation awards we'd won. I pulled up my bank statements, showing her numbers that made her coffee cup tremble in her hands. Susan sat in silence for a long moment after I finished, tears streaming down her face. You built this while we pitied you, she said finally, while Dad lectured you about ambition, while I tried to set you up with divorced lawyers. My God, Ruth! I wanted to tell you so many times. No, she interrupted. I understand why you didn't. We would have ruined it. Dad would have taken credit or tried to control it. I would have competed with it or tried to prove my path was still better. We would have made it about us. She stood and paced to the window looking out at the street below. Do you know what the worst part is? You were happy. This whole time while I was miserable and killing myself for partnership, you were genuinely happy, and I couldn't see it because I was so blinded by my own definition of success. Susan, I'm proud of you, she said, turning back to face me. Not the condescending pride I used to feel when you'd accomplish something small. Real pride. My little sister built something that matters. You're saving lives while I was saving corporate mergers that meant nothing. We hugged, both crying now, years of competition and comparison finally giving way to genuine connection. How are you gonna tell them? She asked. Those Thanksgiving dinner. I'm bringing the mortgage papers. Figured I'd start small, let them process that before mentioning the rest. Susan laughed, really laughed for the first time in months. Oh, Ruth, that's perfect. Death by 1,000 reveals. 2 nights before Thanksgiving, my phone rang with a call that would accelerate everything. It was David, my technical co-founder, and his voice carried an excitement I'd rarely heard. Ruth, you need to sit down. The acquisition offer from MedTech Global just came in. $500 million. $500 million for something that started as sketches in a notebook during break time at the hospital. I couldn't finish the sentence. A life-changing, insane, completely deserved for what we've built. All of the above. What do you think we should do? David was quiet for a moment. I think we've built something special, but with MedTech's resources, we could help millions more kids. This isn't selling out. It's scaling up, but it's your call, boss. I spent the next 48 hours in intense deliberation with my team and advisors. The terms were excellent. They wanted to keep our team intact, maintain our mission, and provide resources to expand globally. It wasn't just about the money. It was about reaching every sick child who needed us. The night before Thanksgiving, I made my decision. We would accept the offer. I sat in my apartment looking at the paperwork that would make me worth over $200 million and felt the strangest sense of calm. Tomorrow, I would walk into my parents' house as their daughter who disappointed them at every turn. By the end of dinner, they'd know the truth. But there was one more thing to do. I called Teresa Martins, who'd given us our first major contract. Teresa, I want to set up a foundation, $50 million to start. Focus on nursing education and healthcare innovation for underserved communities. That's wonderful, Ruth. Have you thought about who you'd want to run it? Actually, yes, my sister. She's a brilliant lawyer who's looking for meaningful work. The morning of Thanksgiving dawned clear and cold. I dressed carefully. Not in designer clothes I could now easily afford, but in my favorite comfortable sweater and jeans. I tucked the mortgage documents into my purse, along with a simple press release about the acquisition that would go public on Monday. Susan texted me, "Ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied. She sent back a heart emoji and one more message. Remember, their reaction doesn't diminish what you've built. You changed healthcare for millions of families. That's what matters. I drove to my parents' house in my Honda Civic, smiling at the thought that this would be its last appearance at a family gathering. Not because I needed a luxury car, but because the symbolic value of keeping it had run its course. The secret was about to end. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Susan's new used Toyota parked next to Dad's Mercedes and Brad's BMW. Apparently, he'd been invited despite everything. Perfect. Let him witness this too. I walked to the door, mortgage papers in my purse, revolution in my heart, and knocked. The house smelled like my childhood. Turkey roasting, pumpkin pie, cooling Mom's famous green bean casserole that she'd been perfecting for 3 decades. I found her in the kitchen, orchestrating the meal with the precision of a conductor, while Dad held court in the living room with Brad and Uncle Richard. "Ruth, you're early," Mom said, not looking up from basting the turkey. "Could you start on the mashed potatoes? Susan's running late as usual." "Actually, she's in the driveway," I said, having spotted her car, probably gathering courage. Mom's movement stilled. "How is she? Really?" She's good, Mom, getting stronger every day. I still don't understand what happened. She had everything. The career, Brad, that beautiful apartment. Maybe that was the problem, I suggested gently, having everything everyone else wanted but nothing she actually needed. Mom turned to face me, and I saw the confusion and pain in her eyes. I just want my girls to be happy, successful, and happy. Is that so wrong? What if happiness and success don't look the way you imagined? Before she could respond, Susan entered through the back door looking nervous but determined. She'd lost weight during her crisis, but her face had a peace I'd never seen during her high-flying days. Hi, Mom. They stood frozen for a moment before Mom crossed the kitchen to embrace her. Oh, sweetheart, you look like myself, Susan supplied with a small smile. I know it's different. Brad's here, Mom whispered as if warning of a natural disaster. I know, Dad invited him. It's fine, Mom, really. We worked together in the kitchen, the three Morrison women preparing food with the kind of careful coordination that comes from years of practice. But there was an undercurrent of tension, things unsaid, floating between us like steam from the pots. Susan was kneading dough for rolls when Brad appeared in the doorway, looking like he'd stepped from a catalog in his pressed khakis and Yale sweater. His eyes swept over Susan's simple outfit with barely concealed disdain. Susan, you look different. My Brad, she acknowledged without looking up. I am different. Your father said you're working at Legal Aid now. His tone suggested she'd announced a career in garbage collection. Bit of a step down from corporate law, isn't it? Depends on how you measure steps, Susan replied calmly. Brad laughed, that condescending sound I'd grown to hate. Come on, Suze. We both know you're too smart to waste your talents on people who can't even afford real lawyers. I saw Susan's hands still on the dough, and I stepped forward, but she spoke first. You know what, Brad? Those people I'm helping. They're worth 10 of the corporate executives I used to represent. They're fighting for their homes, their children, their basic rights. That matters more than helping another multinational avoid taxes. This is what happens when you have a breakdown, Brad said, shaking his head. You lose perspective. Your father agrees. This nonprofit phase is just temporary until you get your head straight. My head has never been clearer, Susan said, finally looking at him. And neither has my vision. I see you now, Brad. Really see you. The affairs with residents. The way you treated me like an accessory. The fact that you're only here because you thought I'd inherit Dad's connections. Brad's face flushed. You're being hysterical. No, Susan said quietly. I'm being honest. Something I learned from my sister. She glanced at me, and I felt the weight of what was coming. The truth I'd carried alone for so long was about to become family property, and Susan was clearing the way. Brad retreated to the living room, and Susan turned back to her roles with shaking hands. Thank you, she whispered, for teaching me that success means defining it yourself. You taught yourself that, I said. I just gave you a couch to crash on. Dad appeared in the doorway as we were finishing the cranberry sauce. Girls, when you're done with your little cooking project, we need to discuss Susan's situation. Brad's willing to give her another chance, and I think... Dad, Susan interrupted, there is no situation. Brad and I are done. I'm not interested in another chance at being miserable. Miserable. Dad's voice rose. You had everything, the career, the man, the future. What more could you want? Peace. Susan said simply, purpose, authentic connections, things that matter more than billable hours and status symbols. That's Ruth talking, Dad said, shooting me a dark look. This is what comes of spending time with someone who's given up on excellence. I felt the familiar sting, but also something new, amusement. If only he knew what excellence I'd achieved while he wasn't looking. Actually, Susan said, Ruth's the most excellent person I know. You just can't see it because it doesn't look like what you expected. Dad huffed and returned to his guests, muttering about ungrateful daughters. Mom watched him go, then turned to us with tears in her eyes. I don't understand what's happening to this family, she said quietly. We're becoming ourselves, Susan answered more finally. The final hour before dinner passed in a blur of last-minute preparations. Extended family arrived. Aunt Patricia with her perfect children, Uncle Richard with his new wife, half his age cousins who'd heard whispers about Susan's breakdown and my continued failure to launch. I caught snippets of conversation from the living room. Such a shame about Susan. At least Ruth's consistent. Remember when we thought they'd both be successful? Well, you can't win them all. Each comment strengthened my resolve. The mortgage papers seemed to pulse in my purse, a secret weapon waiting to be deployed. Susan found me in the bathroom, applying lip gloss with hands that barely trembled. You okay? She asked. Terrified, I admitted. What if they don't believe it? What if they think I'm lying? Then you show them the proof. Ruth, you built something incredible while they were busy pitying you. Their disbelief doesn't make it less real. How are you so calm? They're treating you like you've lost your mind. Susan smiled, and it was genuine in a way her smiles hadn't been in years. Because I know the truth. I was losing my mind trying to be who they wanted. Now I'm finding it by being who I am. That's worth any amount of their disappointment. We hugged sisters united not in success or failure, but in the courage to define ourselves. Then the call came. Dinner's ready, and we walked together toward the dining room where everything would change. The table was set with Mom's best china, the turkey golden and perfect at the center. Dad took his traditional place at the head, Brad to his right like an heir apparent. Susan and I sat across from each other, Mom at the foot, extended family filling the spaces between. Before we begin, Dad said, raising his wine glass, I want to make a toast. Here it comes, I thought, my hand instinctively moving toward my purse. To family. Dad began, his eyes moving around the table. To those who maintain our standards, he looked at Brad, and to those who might still find their way back to them. His gaze lingered on Susan, then dismissed me entirely. Around the table, glasses raised with murmurs of agreement. Susan lifted her water glass, as did I, and we shared a look of understanding. Actually, I said, standing before I could lose my nerve, I'd like to make a toast too. The table fell silent, everyone turning to look at me with expressions ranging from surprise to amusement. Poor Ruth trying to participate in the family traditions. To truth, I said, raising my water glass, to success in all its forms, and to the biggest announcement I've ever had the privilege to make. Dad sighed. Ruth, please, let's just have a nice dinner without any dramatics. No dramatics, I promised, reaching into my purse. Just facts, starting with this. I pulled out the mortgage papers and set them on the table where everyone could see. 3 words stood out in bold letters, paid in full. The silence that followed was complete, as if someone had pressed pause on the entire room. What is that? Mom asked faintly. My mortgage, I said calmly, paid off in full, but that's just the beginning of what I need to tell you. Dad reached for the papers with disbelief. This must be a mistake. On your salary? My salary from the hospital isn't my only income, I said. In fact, it hasn't been for quite some time. Ruth, what are you talking about? Uncle Richard asked, looking confused. I took a breath, feeling Susan's encouraging nod across the table. I built a company, a healthcare technology company called Care Connect. Maybe you've heard of it. Blank stares all around except for Susan, who was fighting a smile. It started 3 years ago, I continued. While you were worrying about my little nursing job, I was developing technology that revolutionizes pediatric healthcare. We coordinate care for chronically ill children, prevent medical errors, and save lives. This is ridiculous, Brad scoffed. You're a nurse, not a tech entrepreneur. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone and bringing up a TechCrunch article. According to this, I'm one of the most successful healthcare technology founders in the country. I passed the phone to Mom, whose face went white as she read the headline, Care Connect, Founder revolutionizes pediatric care valued at $250 million. 250. Dad couldn't finish the sentence. Actually, I said, feeling a smile tug at my lips, as of yesterday that valuation is outdated. We just accepted an acquisition offer from MedTech Global, $500 million. The silence was deafening. Forks frozen halfway to mouths. Wine glasses suspended in mid-air. Brad's face cycling through disbelief, confusion, and something that looked like rage. But that's, Aunt Patricia sputtered, that would make you worth approximately $200 million after the deal closes. I finished. Yes, it would. And that's when chaos erupted. The dining room exploded into voices, everyone talking at once. Dad's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. Mom clutched her pearls like a lifeline, and Brad looked like someone had physically slapped him. Only Susan remained calm, sipping her water with the faintest smile playing at her lips. This is some kind of joke, Dad managed finally, his voice strangled. Ruth, if this is your way of getting attention, it's not a joke, I said, pulling out more documentation from my purse. Articles about Care Connect, screenshots of our user testimonials, the letter of intent from MedTech Global with the acquisition terms. I spread them across the table like tarot cards, revealing the future. Every word is true. Mom picked up one of the articles with trembling hands. Nurse turned CEO transforms pediatric healthcare, she read aloud. But you never said anything. All those times we offered to help you, worried about you. You weren't worried about me, I said gently. You were worried about your idea of me, the struggling younger daughter who couldn't match Susan's success, the one who needed saving. This can't be real, Brad interjected, grabbing one of the documents. I work in healthcare. I would have heard about this. You work in surgery, Susan said coolly. When was the last time you paid attention to pediatric care coordination or anything that didn't directly benefit your career? Brad turned on her. Don't start with me, Susan. Just because you've lost your mind doesn't mean... She hasn't lost her mind, I interrupted. She found her soul. There's a difference. Dad finally found his voice, and it came out as a roar. You built a company worth hundreds of millions and didn't tell your family. What kind of daughter does that? The kind who watched you dismiss every achievement that didn't fit your narrow definition of success, I replied calmly. The kind who got tired of being compared to Susan every time I chose compassion over competition. The kind who needed to prove to herself first that she was capable of extraordinary things. But we could have helped, Mom cried. Connected you with investors' advisors? I had help, I said, from people who believed in the mission, not the money, from mentors who saw potential in a pediatric nurse with an idea, from families whose children were dying because our healthcare system couldn't coordinate their care effectively. Uncle Richard cleared his throat. So you're telling us that while we thought you were struggling, you were actually building a tech empire? Not an empire, I corrected. A solution. The fact that it became valuable is because the problem it solves is massive. Every day, children suffer because their healthcare providers don't communicate effectively. Parents lose jobs trying to coordinate between specialists. Medical errors happen because critical information falls through cracks. I fixed that. She did more than fix it, Susan added, her voice strong. She revolutionized it. While I was billing hours for corporate mergers that meant nothing, Ruth was saving actual lives. Tell them about the little girl in Seattle. I felt my throat tighten. Maya, 8 years old. Our predictive algorithm caught signs of organ rejection 3 days before traditional monitoring would have. She's alive because of something I built. There are thousands of stories like hers. The room had gone quiet again, the weight of reality settling over everyone like snow. Why didn't you tell us? Mom asked, tears streaming down her face. We're your family. Because you'd already decided who I was, I said softly. Every family dinner, every concerned phone call, every attempt to fix my life, you'd written my story. Poor Ruth, the nurse, the one who needed her sister's hand-me-down connections and her parents' pity. How could I tell you I was worth millions when you couldn't even see I was worth respect? Dad's hand shook as he set down his wine glass. This is because of me, because I pushed you too hard. No, Dad, this is in spite of you. I built Care Connect not to prove you wrong, but to prove myself right. There's a difference. Oh, all those times we tried to set you up with men, Aunt Patricia murmured. Told you to find someone successful to take care of you. I didn't need anyone to take care of me, I said. I needed to take care of others. That's what led to this. Brad stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. You expect us to believe that you, a nurse, built something worth $500 million while working hospital shifts and living in that pathetic apartment? That pathetic apartment is where I coded the first version, I said evenly, where I took meetings with investors at 3 a.m. because that's when I was off shift, where I built a team of brilliant people who believed we could change healthcare. So yes, Brad, I expect you to believe it because it's true. Show them the bank statement, Susan suggested with undisguised glee. I pulled up my account on my phone and passed it around the table. The number made everyone go silent again. Even Brad sat back down looking stunned. How? Dad asked finally. How did we not know? Because you never really looked, I said. You saw what you expected to see. A daughter who didn't become a lawyer or marry a surgeon. A failure by your metrics, but I measure success differently. I measure it in lives saved, families helped, problems solved. The acquisition, Mom said faintly. When does it happen? Monday. The announcement goes public Monday morning. By Monday night, everyone will know what you're learning now, that your disappointment of a daughter built something extraordinary. You're angry, Dad said. You did this to punish us. I'm not angry, I said and realized it was true. Not anymore. I'm grateful. Your dismissal gave me freedom. Your low expectations gave me room to exceed them privately. Your focus on Susan meant I could build without interference. Don't bring me into this, Susan said, but she was smiling. Oh, but you're part of it, I continued. The golden child who showed me what happened when you lived for others' approval, who worked herself into addiction and anxiety trying to meet impossible standards, who had to lose everything to find herself. Susan, you were my cautionary tale and I love you for it. Susan raised her water glass to cautionary tales and secret empires. Stop this, Dad commanded. Both of you. This is not how our family operates. No, I agreed. Our family operates on appearances, on keeping score, on measuring worth by titles and salaries. But that ends today, at least for me. I stood gathering my documents. I've incorporated a foundation with the acquisition proceeds, $50 million to start focused on healthcare innovation and nursing education. Susan's gonna run the legal side. What? Dad turned to Susan. You're involved in this. As of this week, yes, Susan confirmed. Turns out my sister thinks I'm brilliant enough to help her change the world. No one's ever believed that before. They just wanted me to bill hours. This is unacceptable, Dad spluttered. You can't just... Actually, I can, I interrupted. I can do whatever I want with the company I built and the money I earned. Just like Susan can choose to find meaning over money. Just like you can choose to be proud of us or not. But your approval is no longer required. Mom stood, slowly walked around the table and took my face in her hands. Is this real? All of it? Every word, Mom. She studied my face, and I saw the moment she truly saw me for the first time in years. My baby built something that saves children. Yeah, Mom, I did. She pulled me into a fierce hug, sobbing into my shoulder. I'm so sorry. We failed you. We were so busy trying to fix you that we couldn't see you were already perfect. Not perfect, I said, hugging her back. Just myself. When she pulled away, Dad was standing too. He looked older, suddenly diminished by the realization of how wrong he'd been. Ruth, he started then stopped. started again. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, I told him. Just know that I'm happy, truly happy, and successful by every measure that matters to me. The merger, Uncle Richard said suddenly. Pemberton's firm. They wanted to partner with Care Connect. That was you. That was me. We turned them down. Their vision didn't align with ours. Brad laughed bitterly. So when Susan was trying to get you a job there, I was declining their partnership offers. I finished. Yes, life's funny that way. The table sat in stunned silence, the elaborate Thanksgiving meal growing cold. Finally, Susan spoke. I think we should eat, she said, and maybe for the first time in years actually talk to each other instead of at each other. Ruth's given us a gift today, the gift of truth. The least we can do is receive it gratefully. Slowly, awkwardly, people began passing dishes. Conversation resumed in fits and starts, everyone adjusting to this new reality. Brad excused himself before the turkey was carved, muttering about an emergency at the hospital. We all knew he wouldn't be back. As I helped Mom serve pie later, she whispered, "Will you forgive us?" There's nothing to forgive, I said. We all did the best we could with who we were at the time. No, she said firmly, we didn't, but we'll do better now, if you'll let us. I squeezed her hand. I'd like that. The gathering broke up earlier than usual, everyone needing time to process what they'd learned. As Susan and I cleared dishes together, Dad approached hesitantly. Ruth, he said, your company, would you tell me more about it? Not the money, the mission, what you've built. It was the first time in my life he'd asked about my work with genuine interest. I'd love to, Dad. As we talked, I saw something shift in his eyes. Pride, yes, but also recognition. Not of the daughter he'd wanted me to be, but of the woman I'd become. The revelation was complete. The truth was out. And for the first time in years, I felt truly seen by the people who were supposed to know me best. Monday morning arrived with the kind of pristine November sunshine that makes everything feel possible. I woke in my small apartment for one of the last times knowing that by day's end, my anonymity would be gone forever. The press release would go out at 9 a.m. Eastern. By noon, the business world would know that the mysterious founder of Care Connect was a pediatric nurse from Ohio who'd built $500 million in value while everyone thought she was struggling. Susan arrived at 7 with coffee and pastries from our favorite local bakery. She looked radiant in a way I hadn't seen since law school, purposeful without the frantic edge that had defined her corporate years. Ready for this? She asked, settling onto my couch with the ease of someone who'd spent weeks sleeping on it during her darkest time. As ready as anyone can be for their life to completely change, I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. Your life changed years ago, she corrected. Today, everyone else just catches up to the truth. My phone was already buzzing with messages from my team. David sent a gif of champagne bottles popping. Maria shared a collage of all our UI designs from version 1 to now, a visual story of how far we'd come. Patricia, our CMO, confirmed everything was set for the announcement. I keep thinking about Dad, I admitted, sitting beside Susan, the look on his face when it finally sank in, like his whole worldview had shattered. It had, Susan said simply. He built his identity around being the father who raised successful daughters, the provider of wisdom and connections. Finding out you'd succeeded beyond his wildest dreams without his help, that's going to take time to process. And Mom, Susan smiled. Mom's already told half her book club. I think she's planning to frame every article about you. We sat in comfortable silence watching the sun climb higher over the city. In 2 hours, everything would change. But this moment, sitting with my sister, both of us finally free from others' expectations, felt perfect. I've been thinking about the foundation, Susan said. I want to create a program specifically for burnt-out professionals. Lawyers, doctors, consultants who've lost themselves chasing someone else's definition of success. teach them it's never too late to choose differently. I love that, I said. Maybe call it the Second Chance Initiative. The Phoenix program, she countered, because sometimes you have to burn everything down to rise again. My laptop chimed with an encrypted message from our legal team. The acquisition papers were ready for final signature. $500 million. It still felt surreal. What are you going to do with it all? Susan asked. The money, I mean. Beyond the foundation, I'm not sure yet. I want to stay involved in healthcare innovation. Maybe angel invest in other nurses with big ideas. Definitely want to expand our reach globally. There are sick kids everywhere who need better care coordination. And personally, I considered this. I might buy a house. Nothing fancy, just something with a garden where I can think. Keep working at the hospital part-time because I never want to lose touch with the problems we're solving. Travel to our implementation sites, meet the families we're helping. No fancy cars, designer clothes, penthouse apartments. Would that make me happy? I asked. The trappings never interested me. The impact does. At 8:45, we dialed into the all-hands meeting where I'd address our full team before the public announcement. 50 faces appeared on screen. Brilliant, dedicated people who'd believed in a vision when it was just sketches in a notebook. Today, we stop hiding, I began. Today, the world learns that a pediatric nurse from Ohio saw a problem and decided to fix it. That all of you trusted that vision enough to help build something extraordinary. We've saved lives. We've revolutionized care coordination. We've proven that innovation doesn't require pedigree or connections, just determination and genuine desire to help. The call erupted in celebration. These people, many overlooked by traditional tech companies dismissed for lacking the right backgrounds, had built something worth $500 million. We'd all been underestimated. We'd all proven them wrong. At exactly 9 a.m., Patricia hit send on the press release. Within minutes, my phone exploded with notifications. TechCrunch, Forbes, The Wall Street Journal. Everyone wanted the story of the nurse who'd built a healthcare unicorn in secret. But the first call I took was from someone unexpected. Ruth. The voice was uncertain, humble in a way I'd never heard. It's Dad. Hi, Dad. I'm watching the news. They're talking about you, about what you built. His voice cracked. I'm so proud of you and so ashamed of myself. Dad, no, let me say this. I spent years trying to mold you into my image of success. I couldn't see that you'd already found your own path, a better path. You helped sick children while I pushed papers. You built something meaningful while I accumulated billable hours. I failed you as a father, and I'm sorry. Tears slipped down my cheeks. You didn't fail me, Dad. Your expectations pushed me to exceed them, just not in the way you imagined. Would you teach me about what you built? I want to understand. Really understand. I'd love that. After we hung up, Susan hugged me tight. He'll never be perfect, but that was a start. The rest of the day blurred past in a whirlwind of interviews, congratulations, and legal finalizations. By evening, Care Connect was officially part of MedTech Global, though we'd maintain our identity and mission. The Phoenix Foundation was legally established with Susan as chief legal officer. My bank account held numbers that still didn't feel real. But the moment that mattered most came that evening. I was back at the hospital for a volunteer shift. I'd kept my promise to stay connected to the floor. In the break room, my colleagues had set up a small celebration. We always knew you were special, said Dorothy, the night nurse who'd worked there for 30 years. But this, you've made us all proud, honey. A nurse did this. One of us. Dr. Hendricks raised a cup of coffee and toast. To Ruth Morrison, who proved that the best innovations come from those closest to the problems, and who still shows up for her shifts, even though she could buy this whole hospital. We laughed, cried, and shared stories of the patients who'd inspired Care Connect's features. These people, my first team, though they never knew it, had provided insights that made everything possible. Late that night, I stood in the pediatric ward checking on a sleeping infant recovering from surgery. Her parents dozed in chairs beside her crib, hands clasped even in sleep. Above the baby's crib, a monitor displayed her vitals, medications, and care plan, all powered by Care Connect's systems. This was why I'd built it, not for the money or recognition, but for families like this one, so parents could focus on loving their sick children instead of managing their care, so nurses like me could spend more time at bedsides and less time coordinating between systems, so children had the best possible chance at healthy lives. Susan appeared beside me, having stayed for the whole shift. No regrets about giving up anonymity? Num, I said. It was time. The secret served its purpose. It let me build without interference. Now the truth can serve a better purpose, inspiring others who feel unseen to build their own dreams. What's next? She asked. I looked at the sleeping baby, thought about the millions more we could help with MedTech's resources, about the nurses with brilliant ideas who just needed someone to believe in them, about the families struggling with fragmented healthcare systems worldwide. Everything, I said. We're just getting started. As we left the hospital together, stepping into the crisp night air, I thought about the journey from that first Thanksgiving humiliation to tonight's triumph. The family who'd pitied me now looked at me with awe. The career they dismissed had changed healthcare. The life they tried to fix had been perfect all along, just not in ways they could see. But the greatest victory wasn't in proving them wrong. It was in proving myself right. In learning that success means defining it for yourself, that worth isn't measured in others' approval, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is build quietly while others underestimate you loudly. Thank you, Susan said as we reached our cars, for showing me another way to live, for catching me when I fell, for proving that success and happiness aren't mutually exclusive. Thank you, I replied, for being brave enough to change, for showing me what happens when you live for others' approval, for choosing yourself even when it costs you everything. We hugged sisters who'd found our separate ways to the same truth, that the only life worth living is the one you choose for yourself. The announcement had changed everything and nothing. I was still Ruth Morrison, pediatric nurse, but now I was also Ruth Morrison, CEO and founder. Ruth Morrison, multimillionaire philanthropist. Ruth Morrison, proof that you can build an empire while others plan your pity party. The ending wasn't really an ending. It was a beginning. The start of living openly as myself, of using resources and recognition to multiply impact, of showing other underestimated dreamers that their visions matter. As I drove home through empty streets, my phone buzzed with one last message from Linda Chen, whose struggle with Zachary's care had started it all. Saw the news. I'm crying. Thank you for seeing our pain and doing something about it. Zachary wants to be an inventor now, just like the nurse who saved his life. Just like the nurse who saved his life. I pulled over, too emotional to drive safely, and let the tears come. Happy tears, grateful tears, tears for every family we'd helped and would help. Tears for the little girl who just wanted her father's approval and the woman who'd learned she didn't need it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Scaling globally, managing wealth responsibly, navigating public attention, helping Susan build the Phoenix Foundation, maintaining family relationships now built on truth rather than pretense. But tonight I sat in my Honda Civic on a quiet street in Ohio, a nurse who'd changed healthcare and felt nothing but peace. Success tastes sweetest when you season it yourself. The road ahead stretched infinite with possibility, and I was ready for all of it. Because when you stop living for others' definitions and start building your own, anything becomes possible. Even happy endings that are really new beginnings. Even a nurse becoming a revolutionary. Even proving that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living well on your own terms. The empire wasn't secret anymore, but the builder remained the same, someone who saw suffering and chose to solve it, who faced dismissal and chose to build anyway, who defined success by impact rather than income. Though the income, I had to admit, as I finally drove home, was a pretty nice bonus. Have you ever felt underestimated by your family or peers? Have you built something meaningful while others doubted your choices? I'd love to hear your stories of defining success on your own terms in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear that their unconventional path might lead to extraordinary places. Like this video if you believe in the power of quiet determination, and subscribe to hear more stories about people who chose meaning over expectations. Remember, your worth isn't determined by others' ability to see it. Sometimes the greatest successes are built in secret by those everyone else has written off. Thank you for joining Ruth's journey. May you find the courage to write your own definition of success, regardless of who's watching or what they expect. Until next time, keep building your dreams, quietly if necessary, boldly when ready.